Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our special guest today, all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. Hopefully, you're still, well, actually, no. You already told me you're not there anymore. You're in New York. This is where my brain starts to shut down. Anyway, all the way from New York City, Laurel Lawson. Look at that. You already told me that you were where you were, and I couldn't even remember because when I think about Atlanta, Georgia, I think about you because that's sort of where we met, where we used to hang
You
out.
know, Atlanta is still home. Atlanta's home, even if I haven't been there a whole lot in the last couple of years.
If you had a choice right now between Atlanta and like New York, somebody said, "That's it. You've got to stay in one place now." You going back
That
to
would be a
Atlanta?
that would be a real problem. One of the practical things I love about Atlanta is that it's a wonderful base city. You know, I live 12 minutes from Hartsfield, and I can be from the curb to my gate in 7 minutes flat. Uh,
What? You're like that close to the airport?
Uh, it's close. I mean, I am between the airport and I'm in what's called Southwest Atlanta. Uh, so it's just north of the airport. It's really easy to get to. I hop on MARTA. The station's a couple blocks. And yeah, I can be right to the airport. If it's the middle of the night, there's no traffic. I'm driving, I'm in a car, 10 to 12 minutes. Uh, yeah, and of course, making the speed run, like all the back routes, pulling the fastest security line, uh, knowing exactly where I'm going, I can move around that place really quickly. So, as someone who does travel extensively, that is a really, really big asset for me. That said, I've also been doing a lot of traveling by car, especially the last 4 or 5 years here since 2020. And yeah, no, if anyone told me I had to stay in one place permanently, I think I would actually lose it.
You'd be like, "Fight me."
Like, I don't know how to do it, Bill.
It's not you.
It's not me. It's not the work I do. I mean, yeah, sure, technically I can do product architecture from anywhere in the world, but also part of what I do is like meeting people, immersing myself in the team and in the research, and the way that I do research is observational. It's not just asking questions, it's being able to observe people, that kind of direct observation of how they work. Not just, I'm not looking at how people work with an existing product, I'm looking at how they work with each other, I'm looking at how they engage with their customer, I'm looking at how a team approaches problem solving. And yeah, I can certainly do that remotely, but I also really find it useful to be able to drop in and get that sort of in-person flavor of what's going on, to help understand where this needs to go. Not tomorrow, not next year, but 10 years out, where does this team, this product, this solution need to be?
There is nothing like being in the same room with somebody. I don't care. Like we know each other, so we can have these conversations, and I think it would be fine. But if we were going to work together and we couldn't be in the same room every so often, I personally think, and maybe this is why I keep saying I'm aging out. I've been saying that a lot lately. I'm aging out, right? Like my ideas are getting old. It's time, right? But even when I'm teaching, it's such a different me in the classroom as opposed to in front of the camera. So I hear you. Okay, since you dug into that a little bit, I do want to have you give everybody the 2 minute spiel on what you're doing today. What is Laurel doing today?
Oh gosh, in 2 minutes. Today I am doing, literally today, I am doing a handful of different things. they all tie back into solving problems, and in my brain, there's no difference if we're solving a problem by writing code, if we're building a device, if we're building a new team process, uh, or even if we're going to make some art about it, if we're going to communicate to solve a problem. It's just what is the right solution for this thing. So, uh, on the technical side, I'm a product architect. I came from uh, what I guess is now old school UI UX world. User interface into product architecture is my technical specialty. But I also do a lot of organizational strategy, strategic guidance work, uh, facilitation, helping people build powerhouse decentralized teams. Um, Bill, I think we were doing decentralized and results only way before that was a thing. I mean, that was kind of where we started in Psychor and really developed that as a methodology. And the reason I'm in New York right now, I am also working as an artist engineer. So I'm actually not just making art as a part of my professional work, but designing and developing new technology, new ways to make and experience art. And that gets into my newest project in collaboration, which is super exciting. I'm gathering like the dream team of artist engineers together, uh, people who I just want to work with all the time.
Artistic engineering. Can we label that? Because that's what I've never even heard that sort of term before with engineering and tech. Artistic
Well,
engineering.
we've always had this strain of engineers who describe themselves as artists, like people who understand that coding is a kind of art that, yeah, it's designed, but when you're in that place of feeling out how you're going to solve a problem, you're making choices, you're creating something that's beautiful. So that's one way to approach it. Uh, there's also, there are a lot of people out there, just like math and music run side by side, other kinds of art, dance, sculpture. There are a lot of people who are multidisciplinary in this way, and that multidisciplinary is being turned into transdisciplinary, where people actually begin to combine them. And I didn't know how to do this until I was at least, I think I was 35, before I was ready to start combining fields. At that point, I had one part of my life where I was a professional dancer. And in this other part of my life, uh, designing products and building products. So bringing those together is a thing, and it is. I don't want to say this is an emerging field because it's always existed, but certainly, where tech is now and where the people working professionally are, this is something that is more recent in the terms of having a cohort of people that are working professionally in this way, where we're both making the art and making the technology to make the art at the same time. We're kind of creating a new medium as we go, which is kind of cool.
So I am constantly refactoring code I write with around the ideas of design philosophy and architecture. I'm never
Hmm.
satisfied, or I do something, I get it to work, and I realize, you know what, I'm not doing things within the scope of this architecture, of this design philosophy of, so now I've got to sort of fix it. I'm constantly reevaluating sort of the code that I'm writing. And I feel like I'm alone on this island most of the time because most people just want to fix something if it's broken and not think about, are they fixing it? I went through this yesterday with somebody that gave me a PR, and I said, that will fix the problem, but that's not how you fix this problem in this code base. This is where
Hmm.
that should be. And then I feel bad a little bit because I'm like, I know you really wanted to fix this and do this effort, but we've got to do it within the scope. So this idea of an artistic engineer, I feel like that's the title that I've been looking for. I want to, that's it. I'm changing my title to art. I'm an artistic engineer now. And if you don't like it, well, but
I mean,
I'm a fanboy, by the way. If you haven't heard, if you haven't figured it out already in the last 12 minutes, I'm a fanboy of Laurel. Love talking to her about this stuff. Learned a lot from her, and so I'm really excited to have you on the show. And then just this idea, yeah, like and plus, hopefully, when we get into your story, some of the tech that you've gotten to work on is also really really fascinating to me. But I love this artistic engineer, right? Somebody who, it's not just about writing code and getting it to work. It's about, are we designing the system for maintainability for the long term as it's changing, right? Are we changing with it? But I think another part, and I'd love you to just talk about it, and we're going to jump in the time machine, is you can have a beautiful piece of art, but if somebody can't come in behind you and maintain that art, then where are we? Was that art just, you know, I don't know where to go with that next question, but you also have to artistically engineer that allows other peoples to come in and maintain that, right?
absolutely. I mean, I think these are some of the, like, one day I'm going to do the whole taxonomy of this. Stephanie and I did that like massive tree diagram because 15 years ago, the question for women in tech was, well, what what job title should I be looking at? So we did this huge, like, it looked like a whole root system diagram of, branching out skills and aptitudes and desires and branching all those out into their little, okay, and this is where these job titles land actually in industry, in practice. So I think we're going to have to do something like that for this area. And I mean, what you're talking about, Bill, I think is um, one of the things that passes my sniff test for what makes an architect as opposed to an engineer. And I mean, for the listener's sake, we should note the fanning is entirely mutual, and knowing that you're one of the architects and systems thinkers that I absolutely trust to be moving in that way, and that's something we've always, as people who teach, as people who mentor, I'm always hunting for that. I'm not someone who teaches developers. I don't teach engineers. I teach architects and designers. That's where I can be most impactful and most helpful to someone. So that's um, though these little differences are important to me, and what you're describing the architect's job to set a style guide for a project, for a code base, to create a set of conventions, a set of design principles for this project so that you know when you are in this code base, you're looking for things in these certain places, you're following these certain patterns, and it's not just chaos, because that is how you create maintainability, how you know that you can pass something uh, to someone else. Another thing I talk about all the time now is that there is no more single person. And the art world, like the formal art world, is really bad about this. They want to talk about the artist. And the reality is there is no more the artist, just like there is no more, one developer creating an entire product. It is always, always, always a team, and you've got to be able to not just go off and, play hero and do the whole thing yourself. You have to design in a way that allows a team to work together. You have to facilitate the team not just interpersonally, but digitally.
All right, I don't want to end this conversation, so we're gonna keep going because I don't get to talk to a lot of engineers like you, and I'm curious about a few things. Even if I have to bring you back for a second episode to jump you in the time machine, I'm too excited about this conversation right now. So um, I want to ask you this: what? Let me give you an example, and then I want your opinions on this. I had started a new project, started with a new team member. I was the team lead, so I'm setting architecture and design. I'm setting guidelines. I'm setting standards. I set that sort of things up, and this person is constantly pushing back. And I have no problem with questioning design because that's how you get better. I love debate. In fact, I don't think you can call yourself an artistic engineer unless you're willing to debate things. Um, and my standard rule is if I'm not going to put it back into my classes, if I can't teach it, we can't do it. So you got to convince
Hmm.
me that this is the better way to go. You have to do, I'm the team lead.
Yeah.
You do have to convince me. And then if you do, I'm going to put it back into my training material and we're going to move forward with that. Okay. But this person was constantly debating without really good argument. It was a rough couple weeks. Okay.
Hmm.
To the point where I said, if you're going to be miserable on this project, you shouldn't be on this project anymore because you haven't given me any reason why this isn't right going to be better. And I already have the experience. So my first question is, how do you deal with someone who's just not willing to open their mind to the experience that you have, or at least even try, which eventually this person did? But you know how I had to, this is what happened. And I felt bad, but I felt like I had no choice. Um, we were, they were writing some code. No, let me ask you this question, then I'm going to go back because let me, so what do you do when you have somebody on the team that has decided that they're not going to do things the way you want, you need them done for this project, and they're just let's just, and let me end my question there. What do you do in that situation, right?
Ooh, I mean, that really depends for me on why exactly this is going on. Without diving in to being someone's therapist and having led many projects, we both know that sometimes uh especially younger team members will try to like project that onto you. So really having to figure out in that situation, I can think of one situation recently where um, I did have that kind of pushback from someone who was um, really just at that point of trying to move from always following instructions, just doing what they were told to do, to trying to think independently, trying to come up with some of their own solutions to things, and that should be supported. That should be praised. And in the way that this was coming up was just in that kind of constant pushback of not following not following the style, not trying to do things differently than uh, the way that was either already implemented in other areas, or even, going off and doing something differently from what had been uh, worked out and agreed in team meetings. So, this person was going through a growth process of their own that's really important for them to go through. And it was manifesting in a way that was hurting the project and, uh, really creating massive friction within the rest of the team. Because what do you do? And I should note, I I run small teams. I really believe that if it's at all possible, working teams, working code cells should be 5 people max, and that includes the team lead. So, you got three, four, 5 people sitting down, working through something together, and then one person goes off cowboy and does their own thing. That's going to create some pretty serious problems. Um, so in that particular case, I did actually have to pull that person from a project and assign them somewhere to make some space. My goals were not to punish them, to support them in, because I want people making that kind of contribution. I am not interested in people who just do what they're told. That's not helpful. You know, that's a junior dev. That's not an engineer, and that's not someone who's going to continue to grow in their craft. Um, and the way that it was manifesting, I mean, honestly, Bill, this is one of the reasons why I kind of think uh, therapy should be just universal. Like, everybody should be assigned a therapist when they get to high school, or maybe even middle school, um, to like help with some of these things, because it does so often come out in the team dynamic, where if anyone has these kinds of pushbacks, that kind of manifests as something that looks like a problem with authority. And that's not necessarily what's going on at all, but in a professional setting, it's also really, really hard to deal with. And yeah, I mean, that's, I think that's something that all good leaders really have to have a feel for. And, sometimes people are just argumentative,
So I'm going to
which
say
can be
something.
good or can be bad.
So I'm going to share one other experience that's going to be controversial, I think here. Um, so I want everybody on my teams to be able to have healthy debate. Eventually, a decision has to be made. We can't be debating something for a week. And at the end of the day, the team leader, at the end of the day, has the full authority to decide what's going to happen. Though majority should always rule, unless you know as a team lead that this is really the wrong, right? Like it's like watching a train wreck. Sometimes you can allow people to make mistakes because they're easy reversible, and there are other mistakes you just can't afford to make. As a team lead, that's your job to sort of figure that out. Now, I'm about efficiency. I hate comments on PRs for little things, for little syntax things, for little style things. Uh, it drives me crazy because it's so inefficient. Where I learned this year that I am somebody that reads code from top to bottom, which is why I have a hard time in GitHub with PRs, because I can't just look at a small piece of code change. I have to look at the entire source code file before and after many times to get a better feel for what's happening. And I found out that somebody on my team was quite the opposite, that they didn't care about reading code from top to bottom. They only cared about that small little piece, which for me means you're fixing things with band-aids 9 times out of 10 instead of just looking at the overall scope of what that change is. Okay. Now, sometimes the changes are tiny, small, and that's fine. But large PRs, forget it. I would rather bring the developer on a meet like this or something and start reading code and doing code review. But and again, I'm not gonna add a comment if you had a small little thing. I'm gonna go into your branch and I'm gonna clean it up. I'm gonna fix it. We're gonna get that pushed. And I expect everybody on my team to do the same thing. I make mistakes, I forget things. I say, don't leave the comment. If you see something, fix it, change it. And if you did it wrong, who cares? We could fix it again. This isn't like we broke a wall, right? We got a back button. Like we've got the last commit. It's fine, right? So I did this with somebody brand new on my team, and they took offense that I changed their code. And I had to have this conversation with them. And I said, do you own this code? Do you own this code? And they said, no. Then why are you offended that I changed it? If you owned it, if this was your code, then I would believe that you'd have every right to be upset that I changed it. But it's not your code. This is the client's code. And me as the team lead technically means that I'm ultimately responsible for it. So it's my code. I'm asking you to help me on it. So you can't take offense that I've changed it because we're trying to get to a deadline. And now you have every right to change it too. If I did something, and a lot of times I would tell this person, don't leave just fix it, just fix it, just fix it. The moment I had that conversation with this person, everything changed. They started following rules. They started embracing the architecture and the design. They started, and I don't know what it was with that particular conversation and the process, but everything changed for the better, not the worse. And I found that, well, one, relieving because this person was an amazing engineer. They really were. It was just a matter of getting this idea that you own whatever change you just made. You own whatever source code file you're working on at that time, and trying to get people to understand that you don't own anything unless it's your project. You're there to help. So I'm kind of curious about what your thoughts are on those ideas. I think it's a controversial opinion. If I share this with people, they always look at me like, "What you? What? What you changed? You just changed their code without asking them? Yeah, but it's not their code." Right. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are and how you deal with that sort of dynamic. I just want to be more efficient than I want to be documentative, let's say on a PR.
Yeah, I mean, I think that uh, I can recognize where that's going to push a lot of people's buttons. And I have worked in environments where both of these things are the norm. That, you fix it and move on, and also environments where you don't touch someone else's PR, you leave the comment and make them go back and do it. I think both ways, have their merits. And I will, sometimes I think there is benefit in the small comments, especially if it's more of a teaching environment. Um, if you're specifically working with someone like on syntax, on style, then those comments can be helpful. It's not the most efficient way forward, but if you're trying to create this cohesive approach moving forward, then maybe you're accomplishing multiple goals here. But what I really hear, what I think is the critical point in what you're describing, is that you gave that person, or, you know, okay, not saying gave because you cannot give other people agency. You explained to that person, you outlined for them their agency on the team and in the project. And that's something I think is really, really critical because a lot of a lot of dysfunction, a lot of lack of communication, a lot of bad feeling. I really think is when people do not have agency in an experience, when people feel helpless to change things or feel like they don't have authority. So it where we can help people to realize their agency, how much power they have, is really critical, making that person more effective, making them better team members and making the team more effective. And just, generally making the world a better place. Like if every single person were fully aware and took responsibility for the amount of power they have to make change in the world, where would we be? Like, where would we be if every single person took responsibility for their actions and realized just how much change they personally could make, um, you know, with their choices, with where they are? And this, as a group, engineers tend to be pretty relatively privileged in the world. We have a lot of power. Um, that's something else I often say about tech. Technology is a lever. If you can manipulate code, you have power to change things in this really concrete way because one person writing code can change things for thousands of people without much effort at all, really. Um, but yeah, I think that that realization of agency, that ability to outline that and help people realize that is an absolutely critical leadership skill. Whether that's like in the situation you outline, where it's agency style working for a client, or if it's a startup working on an owned product, uh, where you want to outline that agency and that sense of ownership in a slightly different way towards that end goal. And that's very much the same thing I'm trying to do in the art world is outline and create agency around experience where, it's not just you're going to come in and you're going to experience what the artist wants you to experience. No, you're going to come in and you are going choose. You're going to yourself make choices about how and what you experience, and, the way that you move through the world, the way that you are in the world, is going to participate in this.
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
So one thing I should add is when I have a new team member, like that first month, I will pair program with them on the PR as opposed to leaving comments. I will just say, let's jump on a meet. Let's go through these changes. I'm
Hmm.
going to drive. And that way, but after like 4 weeks of that, at that point, unless it's something really new, uh,
Hmm.
we're just, we're both just changing code at that point. And you always have the diff anyway, right? And I've broken things by doing that. So this isn't a perfect process, right? Where the other devs, why'd you make that change? You broke something. I'm like, oh yeah. But then I would say, but that's why we're working together as a team. Because just because I made a change doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't be reviewing that as well. You did. The process is working because we
Yeah.
got this done in the last 24 hours as opposed to the last 36 because of asynchronous comment
Hmm.
stuff, right? So, um, but I think some of that philosophy for me was born out of being a consultant, which was the
Hmm.
hardest transition I ever had to go through from FTE to consulting. My business partner, Ed, always said to me when we started the consulting business, you have to be ready to leave in 30 seconds or less because you're not an employee. You're a hired gun. And they're going to let you go tomorrow, and you can't feel like you just left something behind. You just can't do it. And it took me a long time to learn that. I think when you're a full-time employee, you feel a bigger sense of ownership. But if you're going to be in contracting and consulting, and your main, and I've had people who just can't be contractors and consultants. I have friends who I've tried to bring in that I've just had to sit down and say, You don't have the right mentality here, because your mentality is this ownership mentality, and you have to let that go at some level. The team lead is the ultimate, right? So I'm glad I learned that, because I think it helped me be a better engineer, helped me be a better employee, really, right? Like, or consultant. So I think this idea of 30 seconds or less, you got to be able to get out, sort of help that sort of mentality. I say this to people too all the time. You're always self-employed. You're always self-employed. It's just a matter how you want to get paid. Full-time employee, 1099, B2B. It's a paycheck. Just because you're a full-time employee doesn't mean you can't quit tomorrow. You're not like beholden to this company. It's just a form of payment, right? And I think this idea of self-employment is a really critical one for when I started realizing that I am self-employed, I can go anywhere I want and do anything I want. It's just a form of payment. That also sort of helped my mentality.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a couple of thoughts for me. I absolutely agree with all of that, and recognizing that going anywhere you want, doing anything you want, quitting tomorrow isn't an option for a lot of people. Thinking about contrasting my experience here, I have actually never been FTE in tech. I don't know. We might have discussed this over a couple of beers years back, Bill, but when I started out, uh, as a wheelchair user, um, female presenting, uh, and young, there wasn't a place for me. The jobs I was being offered were to do a developer's work significantly. I was literally getting offered less than secretarial roles. So I've been in that contract and consult place from the beginning of my career. Uh, so that's really interesting to me to hear that kind of shift in your mentality, because I'm not sure I ever have really analyzed, like, coming from that place in the beginning. There was, when I was like, when I was 17 or 18, I already had my go bags lined up by the door for different kinds of trips, um, that, would literally be like, out the door, solve the problem, come back. So, yeah, really, you're right that that's really, really different kinds of experience. And when I'm working, I do a lot of work with startup teams now. I do a lot of work with nonprofit teams, um, where something important is cultivating that sense of ownership, which ties into these ideas of agency, which ties into like taking responsibility for your work, and at the same time, dealing with this notion that the company does not love you, the product does not love you. So maintaining both healthy individual needs and being part of a team, which, I mean, being part of a steady team can be super, super rewarding. That's really a huge thing for a lot of folks. Um, being able to make something that you think is important, being able to be proud of your work, and being able to have those boundaries. I mean, those are all important things, and all um, things that have to be balanced against each other. Like, they have to interlock in order for the whole system to work.
You've said this a couple of times, so I also want to explore this with you. When I'm teaching any class, anywhere, I say this at some point during the week. You are responsible for the software you write. You as an individual are responsible for the software you write. And if you're not going to take that responsibility, you're most definitely not going to be on my team. I'm not going to have it. Now, if that's true, you're responsible for the software you write. Um, it can get a little scary, right? Like we are not. I say this in my class. I didn't make this. I can't remember where I got this from, but we're one of the only industries where people's lives are at risk, and we are not licensed to do our job. Okay, we're just not like we're not right. Whatever the software is. So what gets interesting to me, and I worked the very first company I worked for, or say the second company I worked for was a hospice. So a census of 5,000 people coming on the program and dying every day. I could run a report every couple minutes, and somebody passed away, and somebody new came on the program. And I had written a piece of software one time that was remember this is the mid 90s. So there was a patient system we wrote, and we wanted to send faxes to the different pharmacies so the nurses could just put orders in the system. At the time, every pharmacy worked with fax machines. So I had a bunch of computers with fax cards in it, and these orders would go out and the pharmacies would fulfill them. It could be anything from oxygen to pills to medical equipment, whatever it was. So one weekend, I get a call from a branch saying that these computers ran in each branch, that they're starting to get errors on the screen for the software. And sure enough, these were Intel satisfaction cards. They would burn out every 8 to 12 months. They would just burn out. And I told everybody in the office, have spares of these cards. And I told that person, oh, the card's starting to burn out, replace the card. Well, they didn't replace it. And on Monday, I called into an office because somebody died over the weekend because they didn't get the fax, wasn't sent out. It always worked. So the nurse didn't think anything of it. The person didn't get their oxygen. Person died. And this is what I'm being told. You wrote a piece of software bill that failed, and now somebody directly resulted in death. And I felt horrible for 3 days. Now, eventually, after 3 days, I realized a couple things. One, the software was reporting the problem. Two, right, actions weren't necessarily taken. And three, I did everything I could related to that piece of software, to everything I could. And I calmed down a little bit after that. But this idea of taking responsibility, which I still did, was critical. It was critical to me. And so it's always made me decide what projects I want to work on, because, and people will say this is a cop out, but I don't want to work on self-driving cars. I just can't in my brain, because I know what's going to happen. Somebody is going to get hurt, because it's going to take years for that software to get it right. And I think it's going to take years for all of the cars to communicate with each other and get it right. So maybe it's a cop out that I don't want to work on that because I'm too afraid of having another incident where a piece of software failed. Somebody's got to work on it. Don't get me wrong. Somebody's got to work on it. And I give kudos to that. But explore more your thoughts around this idea of you're responsible for the software you write, and how far do you take that maybe on your teams for self? I'm kind of curious where your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was simultaneously amused and so grateful because I remember you saying exactly that, like years ago when you taught that session for women in tech in Atlanta. You dropped in to teach that Go class for us because we had that group of up and coming women just moving into Golang. And I was sitting, in the back off to one side. I think I was literally waiting for the lunch catering to arrive so I could get it set out. And, I was both like stifling laughter and so grateful. You said that from the front of the room, and the looks on people's faces were like stunned. Um, so, I've worked on a lot of mission critical stuff over my career. So my bar for this is also set pretty high, whether it's well, let's take one example that was a pretty serious project for Psycor. We handled the fallback comms for alarm panels, particularly for remote panel systems. If the primary line fails, if the copper fails, then we have to get that signal over cell networks. It's not okay to have a non-responding alarm panel, particularly in a rural region. Someone may not have any other help nearby, may not have any other way to get a signal out. So, that's one example of something that could easily have been life or death. And we worked really hard uh, at establishing processes. Those kinds of projects are where a lot of my thinking about team process. No one is infallible. Every piece of code gets checked. Um, Balancing efficiency and safety, uh, and the number of eyeballs on something before it goes through, the number of, you know, you don't just scan it and push it, you actually check it. That shaped a lot of my thinking about that. So, of course, not every project and not every piece of code carries that kind of weight. Do I want people to take it with the same degree of seriousness? Like, do I want people to be invested, to be like actively present in it rather than just sort of da 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 da. I'm skimming this, whatever. It's fine. I know such and such is good. Yes. So maybe, I mean, one thing I would say is it comes down to like presence in your work. And for me, and this is just me personally, and this is based in like the ways I work most efficiently. If I am distracted, if I can't bring myself to that place of presence and focus, I will go do something else. Like I'm not gonna work on something if I can't give it my presence and the amount of attention that it deserves. I'm going to switch contexts, or I'm gonna, get up, go take a walk, whatever, uh, to make sure that I'm in that place to work. And I will say that that shaped some of my thinking about team process. It shaped certainly the way Psychor works, because I'm not going to demand that someone else, sit in a chair. I don't care how many hours. I don't care really even mostly when or where, unless we've scheduled time to be together specifically. Um, yeah, I think the presence and attention, and this is a little bit of a buzzword now, but care does matter, particularly when we're working on these products and realizing, it's the way that things impact people. One of my very first uh, projects that I was on as a researcher and designer for the FAA, dealing with air traffic control software, like realizing the impact and the pressure. Uh, I really like for teams to actually know what does this do in people's lives. Like, no one should be designing software, no one should be building software without talking to the people that this impacts. And maybe that's the end user. Um, you know, but for your example, that wouldn't even be the end user. because the end user would be those nurses and pharmacists, right? Uh, but the people that it impacts would be the patients. In that case, I would actually have asked the client if I could take the team in to talk to the patients and just get that understanding of, this is how this product exists in the world. This is who it's affecting. This is how it's affecting them, you know, towards understanding, what is this problem? What is it we're trying to solve here exactly? Because another thing, and some clients love this, some clients really hate it. The problem I'm trying to solve is not the problem the client tells me to solve. I'm going to listen to that, and then I'm going to come in and do a full research process and be like, okay, let's, from that outside eye, um, from that position that's not already invested and already has a biased point of view, yeah, you have this problem, and this is the context, this is the situation. Maybe we actually need to solve this problem, and that's going to solve this problem. Or maybe there's all this other stuff involved in it. Uh, you know, the solution is not, usually not, what people think it is.
So what's interesting is me listening to you, realizing that if there were projects where people's lives were directly impacted, I would want you on that project because I know you're going to do everything humanly possible to make sure that no one gets harmed, right? And there's going to be bugs and mistakes, but you know, and if you said, "Oh, I don't want to work on these problems because of some of the things that I said," I'd be like, "Stop! We need you on that project, right?" So maybe I'm starting to realize that, you know, if you have an engineer that really does care about that quality and the people that they're impacting, that we really want those people on the projects as opposed to the ones that don't care, because then maybe that's really when we end up with problems, right? Um, and maybe these are
Yeah,
problems that we should be working on because we care.
yeah, and I mean, some of these things don't get easier. Like, so the new artistic collaboration I'm working on now is, let's say, AI involved. Some of what we're looking at is actually interacting with MLDL models, uh, not just artists on stage interacting with the system and feeding that out to the audience, but the audience actually being in conversation. Um, uh, Actually, my one of my goals here is ultimately to mirror the audience back to itself, to create this environment that helps you realize your agency and your power in the process. And linking that back, um, this is where I've got this intuition and I'm trying to back trace the logic here. Um, yeah, the end impact, like, we have to be in the messiness of it. We have to be in the hard of it. We can't wall ourselves away. We can't be the Silicon Valley isolated team, because that is where, we get teams building products for people who they don't represent. That doesn't work. Teams have to be representative. Teams have to be in the communities they're building for. They need to, if they are not directly building for a problem that deeply affects them, they need to be in and with the people and experience that, to have that kind of openness and vulnerability to go in and really understand what you are doing, what's going on, how is this affecting people, how is your solution going to affect people differently? Because, we're just trying to fix shit, right? We're trying to make things better, I hope, mostly. Obviously, not everyone in the industry is, but in our corner of it, we're trying to make things better. So, how is your solution going to impact people? How's it going to make things better from what has been the previous situation. Yeah, it really is about that level of sort of researcher empathy, and that's one of the reasons why I do not believe in having divorced development teams. Um, Maybe my approach could be summed up as everybody is a researcher at some
So
level, at some point.
uh, let me share with you how immature I was at 25. This hospice company I worked at really formed a lot of thoughts for me. I'm like 25 years old working there, right? So two things show you how immature I was at 25. The company would require every employee to go to one of the hospice wings to see the patients. Now, at one point, I had to go do some IT work in one of the wings in a hospital that this company had hospice. And I remember trying to get to the PC and having to just look in a couple of rooms and just seeing these very old, frail people where they had 6 months or less to live. Like at Bill Kennedy at 25 didn't want to deal with that. So I had seen it for like 2 seconds one time because I had to go fix some PC. They sent me out. So every year you were required to go to a hospice and spend the day with the nurse. And every year I would somehow figure out a way to avoid going because I wanted no part of, at that time, um, the immaturity level, right, of seeing that. Now, Bill Kennedy, immature. In the 90s, the idea of writing tests just, at least for me, didn't exist. Okay? It just didn't exist. So we would essentially run our software over and over again against either test databases, or every once in a while we'd connect it to the production database to just do some final testing. So I had something that was due the next day. I'd been working on it for several weeks. It had to do with the changing census. So if somebody came on, it had to do something. If somebody passed away, it had to do something. And I told you the census was active. So during the day, I could run this software against the production database every 30 seconds. And it sounds crazy, but somebody was passing away and somebody was coming on almost every 30 seconds. Like I just took that for granted. So now I'm at home and it's like almost midnight. This thing is due tomorrow, and I've got one last bug when somebody passes away. So I'm running the software and the census doesn't change. Okay? 3 minutes goes by, census doesn't change. 5 minutes goes by, the census didn't change. Laurel, I kid you not. I look up at the sky in my room and I say, why can't somebody die? And then I went, Bill, what did you just say? I mean, I shut off the computer and I said, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, that's it. I was so immature that everything was just a number. And I wanted to keep it that way in like 25, 26, to the point where I looked up and asked God to have somebody pass away so I could validate that my software worked. No, my stomach hurts just thinking about it, right? But it was these experiences with the fax machine, with that, not having proper tests, right? Which sort of formed a lot of these sort of, I'm sharing this and now everybody can look at me, but this is image, I call Bill 1.0, right? 25, 26-year-old Bill 1.0. And so having this conversation with you makes me wonder now, if we've got young engineers that don't have that life experience yet, right? Because I didn't have enough life experience. I never took that into account until now. Like now I'm starting to think about my teams and thinking maybe this person just doesn't have enough life experience or is still immature, because I was super immature. And I need to realize that and maybe be less hard and make these more teaching moments than like wrong engineering moments maybe. I don't know. I'm going to throw this at you now after hearing this story. So, if you were watching the YouTube, by the way, Laurel's head was. I didn't even finish the story, and she knew. This is how experienced she is. She knew where it was going.
I mean, it was not. It was very broadly predictable.
She's still
This
holding
was
her
this was
head.
this was going down a pathway. Yeah, and
But
yeah, I
wait,
mean,
were you like that at all early in your career? Did you have these, or you were just always mature enough to realize that, like, you just don't look up at the sky and say, "Hey, I need something bad to happen so I can test my software."
not at 25. As someone who's been disabled from birth, I came up in the medical system myself, and I had to go through a lot of those really hard experiences really young, frankly. Uh, I had absolutely many other many other kinds of immaturity. I was socially terrible. I judged people really harshly. I have really, really high standards and high expectations for myself that I try not to put onto other people anymore. Uh, but it did take me, one of the particular ways I was immature was that if something was obvious to me, I could not understand why other people were like, just not getting it. I mean, being with someone who's dying is one of the hardest things. Like being with them, again, really being present with them in that moment, um, is really, really hard. I'm not going to blame you for not being ready for that at 25. There are people who never are ready for that in their entire life. And I do know a lot of people who work in hospice or who work as death doulas. And I do think it's something that is not just important and valuable work. I do think that that is an experience that people should have because, you know, uh, death and taxes, uh, I might change that to death and illness. These are things that everyone is going through, whether we like it or not. Can't change it. But yeah, I do think this is one of those reasons. Obviously, I think representation and diversity is absolutely critical in software teams. If you show me a team of people who all look the same, there's going to be a limited set of problems that they can really address. People who are coming from different kinds of lived experience are going to have more capacity to solve problems together. And of course, that includes age. When I don't remember exactly what the number is it's 27 that the frontal lobe of the brain is finally fully developed. Like none of us are mature before 30. So when I look at really young teams, and for me, a young team, sometimes, I mean, I'm seeing teams now where no one is over 30. I'm certainly seeing teams where no one's over 35. It's like, okay, um, I have some ideas of the kind of life experience that you don't yet have. I have ideas of the kind of technical experience that you probably haven't got. I know maybe I'm coming in and I need to do some work around. Oh, we'll just put it in the cloud. Okay, let's talk about what the cloud is. That means someone else's server. Um, the something you were talking about earlier about reading code from top to bottom, that's an architect's trick. That's you're holding you're holding this castle in the sky in your head. You're holding this code base, you know, mentally visualizing it and looking at the patterns and the systems from all around it. And that is really, really different from looking at snippet, snippet. I think there is value in both. I think these serve really different purposes. Uh, but that's one of the reasons why context switching is it's so hard and takes so long. If you're in this place where you have built everything you're working on in your mental workspace. And in all these years, I still haven't figured out how to teach that. I don't want to say that that's something people either come with or they don't, or they have to discover it for themselves. But if you figured out how to teach it, please let me know because I
I've got
haven't.
it actually. I'm teaching that in my software design class, but we do it as a big pairing session. So we're writing code and talking about design philosophies and guidelines and rules and refactoring for the 20 hours
Mhm.
to get to a point where now you know how to engineer and think about these things. You don't have to agree with everything, but if you don't agree, then what is it that you believe and how are you going to make the changes, right? So that's how I've been doing it for the last 3 years. And it's like, it's been a great class because people finally start to understand and learn how to think in these ways. Because you're not trained in
Uh,
university, you're just trained to write code and
yeah.
solve a problem.
Okay. I guess I obviously need to come back and take a refresher in one of your classes then, because yeah, the ability to like build that structure in your mind. It hadn't. I mean, of course, we use pairing heavily, and I now teach pairing as a technique in basically every aspect. Like, I don't care what you're doing. It's not just for coding. It is for literally like every. I teach pairing in like nonprofit organizational leadership now, uh, as a way of communicating, as a way of building process, understanding each other, like understanding the system you work in and the people you work with.
I'm
But
going to give
yeah,
you access. I'm going to give you access to my software design class so you can sort of see that. And even if you go through it quickly, I think it will give you ideas on how to approach your design philosophies and guidelines when you're sort of teaching them.
and
Um,
uh, thank you. I mean, I still think you're one of the best teachers in the field, obviously.
okay,
There's a
so
knack.
we've got like 20 minutes left now. Just for everybody to know, I'm bringing Laurel back to do our traditional show because if you've listened to this and you're fascinated by Laurel, then you definitely want to hear her background. So we're going to schedule something again after this so I can have you back and we do our traditional show. It's just I don't get to hang out with a lot of people like you and have these sort
It-
of rich conversations.
yeah, come
So
on. This was more
I took
fun.
advantage of it. No, no, no. Everybody's got to hear your backstory because then it really will connect these two things together. But but I got 20 minutes left with you. So you had brought this up. So I'm gonna I want to sort of maybe end the show with this. A broad question: are you using any AI development tooling today for your own work? Are you good? Are you okay and happy with people on the team who are writing the code using this sort of AI tooling? I'm not going to just say code gen, but AI tooling. And then, sort of, what are your thoughts about the tooling? Is it benefiting? Is it? I'll give you my thoughts after. Is it benefiting? Is it hurting? Where is it benefiting? Where is it hurting? Those types of things.
Oh boy, let's
Uh,
dive right
I wish you
into.
could. If you're not watching YouTube, I already your face expressions were I think like mine, but let's go.
Let's dive right into making a whole lot of people probably real mad. Um, I often don't even begin with using the term AI because that is not accurate for what is going on right now. It's something, as somebody who works in a lot of spaces, both deeply technical and completely non-technical spaces, I think it's important to be really, really clear. Uh, Sometimes I get called pedantic because I go back to, okay, let's actually define this word and make sure we are all talking about the same thing right now, because almost universally people have different imaginings of what a term means. And AI is particularly uh, there right now because people have got wildly different ideas of what that means. It's become emotionally attached. Uh, so I often I will use it in shorthand if I'm in a group that I know has shared understandings, but if I'm not, I'm actually going to back out of that term and talk about machine learning, talk about deep learning, talk about large language models, and in particularly, of course, in non-technical contexts, I have to actually go back and explain what things are going on. My experience with it in a professional setting, in designing products, writing code, shipping, uh, is that it is unhelpful. Like I think probably basically everybody, we all went in, we all did our own kind of testing, played around with it. The Not to sound, just terribly arrogant about it, but I want to put stuff out that is better than the average. And the best result you can get from these kind of assistive tools right now is the average. Yes, for some people, they can be an accelerator, they can be a time saver, where you don't want those being used if they're putting out something that someone doesn't understand. Like, that's kind of like, at least with copy pasta, hopefully you're pulling from a working chunk of code. Uh, but on a team that I'm running, I want to know that you have the basic understanding of what you're doing. If someone is using code gen to expand out, if they're writing their logic and popping functions in, that is one case where I think this can be really helpful. But I don't want I don't want to be going from faulty or not adequately laid out logic into code snippet that may or may not work. Part two, I think the ethics of this are massively, massively problematic. The fact that a huge number of these bases have been trained on code that is not public. And of course, this is also the thing, this is absolutely the hot button thing in art, that these models are being trained on copyrighted works. Companies are generating profit off of the work of artists who are not being compensated for their work. And that is a dead end street. Because what happens? The artists quit making work. We quit having things for the models to be trained on because they're not actually generating new things. They are recombining. They're pulling from this source. Is that a new file? Yes, obviously. Uh, but it's still pulling from this set of things. So this is one of the, you know, this is the way that capitalism works, obviously, finding and exploiting the places where profit can be created. In this case, the way that profit is being created is directly harmful to the people that you're harvesting from. So, whether we're talking about art or code, that's a pretty serious problem and a reason not to participate. And the harms of this aren't evenly distributed. Um, the harms are disproportionately impacting people who are more marginalized already, both inside and outside of our industry. Things are moving quickly, obviously. This is one of the reasons why, you know, as a technologist, as an artist technologist, I think putting people in conversation with a deep learning model, um, and when I say in conversation with, I'm really meaning I'm putting people in conversation with themselves, creating this environment where I can use this tool to create a different way for people to talk to themselves and to realize their relationships with each other, to realize, you know, because if we are in the same room, breathing the same air, we are changing the world for each other. So, you know, really deeply realizing that level of interdependence, we cannot exist without each other. Um, so as a technologist, that is an absolutely fascinating problem for me. And as an artist, I think that's valuable work to do. Um, but
I
that's
wonder,
really, really
I
different.
wonder how many developers who are using these tools realize that maybe the code that's being generated is proprietary private code. I think I think the majority of people assume that if there's content and words in these models, that it all came from some public, properly licensed source. So it's there's no ethical or moral dilemma there.
No, I mean, it seems like this has been talked about so much, it seems like it should be pretty much common knowledge now that if you're using it, and even if it's, you know, even if you feel guilty about it, but you're still using it. And of course, um, all the large companies are developing their own in-house models exactly for this reason, you know, things that are trained on their own code base. And that, I mean, if you think about that as a kind of specialized search function, I mean, that's super helpful because that's going to give you that style adherence, design patterning, coherence of language and syntax. That's, you know, that's a case where training it on your internal code base, um, developing the model yourself, addresses the ethics problems. Um, that is a super useful tool for a large company, anyone who's got a code base of the size to do that. But the public models, yeah, I mean, and I do know a ton of people um, who acknowledge they know it's wrong. They know that that's pulling from copyrighted works, and they do it anyway. They feel bad about it, but they're still doing it. So it's kind of like just knowing something isn't on the up and up isn't enough reason for people to not do it if they're getting some advantage from it. So
So
yeah, and
my two experiences are this, and one, Jessie Frizzell, I don't know how many months ago, said she was using some of this tooling to generate code, and the code worked, and then she realized after looking at it that it had a bug in it that could have made it into production. And I just remember reading that tweet, and I'm paraphrasing a bunch there, but this idea that um, I guess maybe she was at some level, like I think a lot of people, just trusting the code because it worked and it looked right, and then realizing how many people are just doing what we always. I tell all the people that train at Ardan, do not ever, even in a blog post, publish bad code. I don't want you to say this is bad and this is good, because somebody's going to see the bad code, not know it's bad code, copy and paste it. And what have you just done? You've not helped that human being at all. So never, ever publish bad code, even if you're trying to do a bad code example. And so my takeaway on the Jesse's tweet was that same thing. It looked good, it worked, but then she looked at it even closer and she went, "Oh my God, how many people have bugs in their software now because they just blindly trusted that?" The other thing is this for me. Um, by the time I get to write that if statement or that for loop, like that's my reward, because I've spent all this time thinking about that code. Now I finally get to write it. That's the fun part. Like, why do I want some tool taking away the reward for figuring out that's what I need to do? And I was pairing with somebody who was a good engineer, but at some point I had to tell them they were driving. I tell them, turn it off, turn it off. It's in my way, right? It's not even giving me enough time to think about the next. It's not saving me time. It's actually causing me pain because while I'm typing that, I'm thinking about the next thing and it gives me time to think, right? So those have been my experiences with it. Have you tried to use like a co-pilot or anything?
Not Copilot specifically. I did the run through of, some of the various models and used a couple. I tried pulling out a couple of things that should have generated about like 10 or 12 lines of code that were real problems, was something that I actually needed, and I fed it the logic and did not get anything that worked. Actually, did not out of any of the models that I tried get something working, which is perhaps not surprising because this was trying to think of the specific examples that I used. So one of them had to do with spatial audio. One product that I use artistically is a really trivially simple spatial audio interface. And we use that in performance for multi-track audio description, which is how someone who is non-visual would experience a performance, whether they're blind or low vision or just don't use vision as a primary sense. So that performance is primarily experienced as audible. We put multiple tracks in spatial orientation, artistically, that can be spoken description, poetry, soundscape. There's a bunch of options, and people move within this audible universe to experience, to choose their experience, create their audible sensory experience of the work. And working on getting this to a wide launch product. Something right now, it takes a lot of very specific audio engineering to prepare the tracks and prepare the cues and line everything up between the visual version and the audio version. Working on getting this to a place where that's not an issue, where you can just put your tracks in and the software will handle a lot of this for you. And so I was basically, one of these situations was I was asking for code that would automatically handle, let's say you put in 3 tracks. One of the things I do in audio engineering for this is use subaudible frequencies that actually help you separate the tracks to be able to listen to multiple tracks and comprehend them. So I was asking for a little snippet that would basically automatically generate and assign that. So I was asking for something that was, as far as I know, novel. If there was a library out there that already did this, if there is one, it's proprietary. If anyone knows of an open source library that does this, please send it over. I do not want to reinvent the wheel. Efficiency, if it's out there and it works and it's good, delighted to use it. We are primarily an open source shop. So I was asking these tools to create something that was not out there to pull from. And that might have been one of the reasons why I didn't get a working result back.
Yeah. Actually, it kind of goes back to your other point that it can only regurgitate what it knows, and it can't invent or really create anything.
Yeah.
New or novel.
Can we get can we get to a point where maybe, if you're prompting, if the logic in your prompting is absolutely clear, which, I mean, that is the basis of coding, is being able to have absolute clarity in your logic, right? That is ultimately the set of instructions we're using. I don't care what language you're actually writing in. We can communicate across drastically different languages if we know what our logics are, and we should be able to create the same thing in different languages, um, if we're working from that same logic chain. So maybe we can get to a place where that logic chain can be turned into working syntactically correct code. My hunch is that that's achievable, but that's not the way the models are functioning right now. That's, that's not what's actually going on under the hood. It's going out
Okay.
there and looking for something that's made.
So we are out of time. I am bringing
Darn.
you back. So we're going to schedule you to come back because we gotta have a traditional show with you. I don't know why. I just felt like I needed to have this conversation.
Come
More
on,
of
this
an
was more
engineering
fun, Bill.
conversation. You think
This
it's
was
more
more
fun,
fun.
but I'm going to have fun exploring
Well,
sort of your history. So
obviously you thought it was more fun too. Come on.
I don't get to hang out with engineers like you, this level of engineer you are. So I had to take advantage of it. But once we're done here, I'm going to schedule to have you come back so we can do that. Okay. Well, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, we'll put it in the show notes for this show. What's the best way for somebody to ping you?
Probably email. Folks can contact, if it is technical, you can reach me at ll@cycoresys.com, CYCORESYS. If it is artistic, if you're interested in organizational or strategic consulting, a talk, a performance, etc., whatever. You can also email me at laurel@rosetree.org, ROSETREE. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. All the email accounts go to one place anyway, but reach out. I am basically on 100% travel, so I have a little bit of a delay. I may not get back to you same day, but yeah, reach out if you want to talk, and reach out if you are an artist technologist interested in some of these problems too, because we got some fun stuff going on.
Yeah, which we're going to explore in the next show at Laurel. So, well, thank you for your time today. I'm already going to say thank you for your time tomorrow. I don't know when we're going to talk again, but soon.
Not tomorrow.
I know it's not tomorrow.
I'm actually going on tour next week. But yeah, let's talk about 2 weeks maybe.
Yeah. I'm going to schedule that. We're going to schedule that. Okay. This is Bill Kennedy and Laurel Lawson signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast, and we hope to see and hear from everybody again real soon.